Thursday Night Live?
Yes.
One thing that's been so powerful is that we have always started and ended with prayer. And at the beginning, I honestly thought, well, I guess we should do this because we're Christians and we're planning worship. But as time has gone on, some of the most powerful moments for me in this Thursday Night Live process have been the three of us in prayer. And one of our guiding questions throughout this process is, where are we experiencing the living God at work? And how is God working within ourselves, within this community, and within Thursday Night Live? And recognizing those moments and trying to lean in and actively move with the Spirit. We did a lot of work over the summer coming up with sort of what are the values, the flexibility, the responsiveness, the intergenerationality, that kind of stuff. And so how are we going to make decisions as we move through and things are coming up that we need to respond to?
So we listened to a podcast this summer that really helped us to frame what intergenerational worship truly means is not kid-centered worship, but worship where children are included and are given responsibility and valued for what they can contribute, but they aren't overly valued either, where it's that all of God's people are seen as equally important to the gathered life of the community. To create an identity for this service, it seemed very important that there was stability from week to week. Not rigidity, but that when you walked in, you had a sense of what to expect. And there could be responsiveness within that stability, but that we intentionally didn't change everything every week. If we changed something, it was part of a larger seasonal shift. We explained what the changes were. So the idea being that it wasn't frenetic. It wasn't a different thing every week, but you could begin to expect something. You could begin to prepare your heart and mind for that ritual, for that liturgy.
And so one of the first values that I think that we wanted to make part of Thursday Night Live was responsiveness. Because last year, Community Eucharist had some real gifts, but kind of once the train started going, it wasn't very flexible throughout the year, and when feedback was given, it was like things were kind of already set and weren't able to be tweaked. So one of the things that we wanted to do was have a way for people to give us feedback and then have a way for us to respond.
How can we make Thursday Night Live a place that is welcoming for all of God's people and isn't just catering to one particular demographic, because really what we're doing in worship is we are the body of Christ worshiping God. And so how do we create an environment where the whole body of Christ can be gathered together?
Thankfully, as seminarians, we are in chapel every single day. We see good worship modeled day in and day out, but almost to the point of what perfect worship should look like. And what I love most about Thursday Night Live is it's an example of a worship service that there is no such thing as perfection. It's different every single week, and we definitely lean into this idea that God moves in many different ways, through many different lives, through our community.
How do we welcome the gifts that people bring and then sort of bring them into the community and then set them free? And so, Anna Marie, one of the leaders helping us with the music, always says, share the work. How are we sharing the work? How can we really make this not about perfectionism or tightly controlled, or this is about you have to walk in this particular way and the torch has to be X, Y, Z, but to really say, what does the light of Christ represent? And when you're carrying the light of Christ into this community, how might you do that in a way that honors the light of Christ? And so it's about sort of expanding the conversation, because when you talk to it in that way, they're like, oh, I know how to care. Like, I can be respectful, I can do this thing. But if you never have that conversation, and youth participation in worship is all about a list of rules to follow, that's not empowering and that's not forming faith. That is just making this one more place where there's rules of things you can and can't do. But instead, what I think has blossomed within Thursday Night Live is this is a place where we live our faith. And we do that in ways that are age appropriate and that are really filled with responsibility for what we mean to one another.
How can Thursday Night Live be both a worshiping community, a community of faith that is liturgically centered, and also form people as disciples? And so we've played around with a lot of ways to do that. And one of the very best examples, I think, that I've seen so far is the acolyte training. It wasn't just the nuts and bolts, like here's the torch and you carry it from point A to point B. You did an amazing job of making it actually an opportunity for formation of disciples. We had a whole conversation about sacred space, about the liturgical objects, about worship and why it's important and why do we come here, and what is the role of an acolyte as a worship leader. To our value of learning, and experimentation, not for experimentation's sake, but for the sake of learning, that we want to have a space where we can try some things and even fail in order to learn.
There's an air of experimentation. People have preached without notes for the first time in this service. People have totally strayed from their manuscript because something has happened in the room, and they then feel free to engage with what's happening in the room rather than this is my sermon written on this piece of paper. There's a sense that this is my proclamation happening in the midst of this community. And when there's a loud noise or a kid asks a question, then we need to be able to engage with one another. That's not an ethos that will work for every service, but I think giving people the freedom to experiment and to be whole selves preaching has been part of what has really contributed to the vitality.
Whenever a decision comes up, we take a step back instead of kind of the knee-jerk reaction, which is at the beginning of this process what I always wanted to do. The very first service of this year was supposed to be outside in the chapel garden, and we had everything planned. It was the very first one, and we were anxious. And then it was like 95 plus degrees out, and people were saying, is it still gonna be outside? It's like really hot. And my first reaction was like, yes, because we planned it to be outside. Afterwards, each one of us said we had that same reaction. But then because of this supportive team, we were actually able to take a step back and say, what are our values? What are our values? And we have said that over and over again, almost every week. What are our values? How are we going to respond to this based on our values? And we said one of our values is responsiveness, and the other one is flexibility. And we realized, like, God can be praised in the chapel garden or in Emmanuel Chapel, and that to be responsive and flexible, we needed to move the service. And it was not perfect, but God was praised, and there was something so grace-filled about that.